Kevin and I are reporters from ABC News, which is the largest media organisation in Australia. And for the last 6 months, we've been working with ARIJ and Deutsche Welle for a project about media bias, specifically looking at ways to weed out bias in pre-publication stories, so before they get out into the public, making sure the stories have no bias within them. But before we go into what we were doing in our project, it's important to look at what the history of bias is with AI. So Kevin?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for showing up. So right now, news organizations around the world are rightfully excited or concerned about particularly large language models or LLMs, and how they're going to impact the work that they do. So while AI systems can't yet complete all the tasks expected of a full-fledged person, so you and I, they can certainly excel and outperform humans in certain aspects. So as the industry evolves, a new branch of research is developing concurrently called AI alignment, which seeks to steer AI towards human goals to avoid unintended consequences and to instill moral values, or at least the machine equivalent of moral values, into AI. So when Marianne and I conceived the first iteration of our program earlier this year, we kept in mind from the beginning that the results of machine learning is only as good as the training data. So the anecdote that we were really fixated on, or me particularly, was somewhere around 2019, a machine learning tool which had analyzed a person's CV or their resume on behalf of a hiring company. When this tool was audited, it was revealed that the algorithm prioritize two factors in a person's resume to be indicative of high job performance. The first is if their name was Jared, and the second is if they played high school lacrosse. No doubt, there was a statistically significant correlation between CEOs and people who play a sport typically relegated to private boarding schools. But few in good faith could argue that these factors were useful. This is an example of where AI and machine learning fails to succeed. AI gives the person exactly what they want at the exclusion of other things. So the industry, to some extent, is already grappling with the problem of exclusion. So popular image generators that a lot of you may have known, such as DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, were found to overwhelmingly produce Caucasians when asked to generate generic people who were, for example, bankers. But when asked to produce things like homemakers or janitors, they were found to generate overwhelmingly images of women and people of color, respectively. So even before we started to, work on a project about, how do we identify and remove bias, we had to create a healthy data set to work with. So while previous researchers have considered the problem of bias, what we understand to be journalistic bias was somewhat different and a kind of unexpected problem we had to resolve. And Marianne can explain.
Yes, you have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to get a little bit technical, so I'm sorry. While doing our research, we found that there were a handful of studies on AI and media bias, but those primarily looked at detecting political bias in media outlets and then identifying biased text spans. So what made our project different from these is we were proposing to rewrite biased text during article production and not just identifying it afterwards. So there's a baseline of articles and texts that contain bias called the wiki neutrality corpus, which we and those other research groups used to pre-train our AIs. So it's just a huge spreadsheet of paragraphs and article links of where bias appears in news articles. But again, we needed to take it to another level and begin creating our own data sets in English and in Arabic with thousands of human-written corrections. Those human correctors were professional journalists, editors, UN gender experts that looked at 3 key areas of baseline outputs. We're looking at grading the AI on a scale of 1 to 3 like a school teacher would, suggesting improvements and providing explanations. The rating looked at grammatical errors, whether the tone and style of the author remained, and if any key information in the article was changed. And then we rated the ratings. So with a kappa score, we saw if the annotators agreed whether or not these were good results or whether they could be improved on. So some outputs got a big 0, like the one here that changed the sentence from closing the gender pay gap is not rocket science, and it changed it to just a ridiculous thing that said, the gender pay gap remains a significant issue in various industries, like STEM fields. It's just not the author's intention, it removes the style, and it changed basic information of the sentence. So while it's clear that the AI models we used had figured out how to write, but what it couldn't figure out is how to write like a journalist. So it's our hope that with more time, we can generate tens of thousands of examples of corrected articles with professional explanations from experts in the field to have an AI that not only catches unconscious bias that would normally be published, but does it in a way that is indistinguishable from a human, moral, and ethical editor.
So look, what we just showed you is just one example of the attempt to rectify the foundational problems with working with AI. And it's kind of need to address going forward to ensure, as best as possible, that the technology is equitable. Some services, recognizing this problem, are adding hidden logit commands or kind of hidden little prompts in their generation processes. For example, sometimes ChatGTP might secretly add the word ethnically ambiguous into an image prompt to ensure both the output and the broader data being trained doesn't become skewed. However, for those who work in diversity spaces, they know simply being present isn't enough. And in our little time that's dwindling, there's a lot to address. But I'll just come back to the beginning of our talk, where I mentioned AI alignment and how it's about ensuring the development of technology is aligned with human goals. Our research and other researchers like us isn't going to solve racism, sexism, or political division. But if we in this room believe that journalism at its core is to the benefit of humanity, then journalistic values should be a constant in AI development going forward. Thank you.